Hello and welcome to another episode of the Cult Products podcast. And today we are joined by a very special guest. My name is Phill. I'm one of the founders at Yaya.
My name is Adam and I am also one of the founders at Yaya. And Ben, would you like to do a bit of an intro?
Yeah, great to be here with you all. I've had the pleasure of knowing you both for about 10 years. And so it's very surreal and also a great moment to be on your brilliant podcast.
Yeah.
10 years.
So that's incredible, really, isn't it? 10 years. We all originally met at chemistry group when we were working in the marketing team at that startup. And first introduction to Ben was pretty memorable because I was basically called into a meeting on the basis that, like, you're going to meet this really cool guy. And then there was no further briefing or agenda required for that meeting. I don't know exactly what you thought you were there to do in that meeting, Ben, or if you'd had any more brief. But basically, we talked for about an hour with about 5 of us in the room. And then the CEO turned around to 2 of us on one side of the table and said, "Ben's really cool, isn't he? Which one of your teams can he work in?" With the premise that you'd either come and work in product or marketing. And I don't think any of us were really expecting that question. But all worked out well in the end, and we did get the chance to work with each other then. And since then, really, and I guess you've been the person who's really helped me and Adam most as far as like thinking about business development and sales. And that was obviously like very new to us at one point. You've also worked with us at Yaya, helping to train everyone really in what you call showing up and sales really, really well. So I'm really excited in today's episode to talk about getting into like how B2B tech startup founders can transition into more of a sales role within their organization, what they need to do, some of the psychology behind that, and basically just pull a load of your experience and the lessons that you've learned out of your head. So welcome to the podcast, Ben.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Cool. Cool. All right. So just a good place to start, I suppose. We've been having a lot of conversations lately with people who've started these B2B tech startups and have come from a background where they are maybe like a subject matter expert. They've spent a lot of time kind of developing and mastering their craft in a space within a business, but they've never been salespeople before. And I think a good place to start is let's talk about that transition phase and how you get from not being a salesperson to being a salesperson. So interested, Ben, what your sort of reflections are on that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing with sales because it's almost a bit of a dirty word or even taboo word, because people hear sales and you might think of like the archetype of whether it's a door-to-door salesperson or someone ringing you up or into a retail shop and trying to sell you something you're not sure whether you need or perhaps think you adamantly don't want. And then when people are faced with the idea that they've created a product or a company, and then now they actually need to sell it. And I've trained well over 1,000 people to sell, but I think sell it's almost like too much of a basic semantic, because all of us are selling most of the time, whether it's like selling our ideas or to convince our partner that this thing that we should buy is a good thing or we should go on this holiday. All of us, all of the time, in some way or not, are selling. And yet sales is still seen as this very particular technical thing that you do when you're trying to essentially bring in money to your company. And of the many people that I have trained how to be really good at selling their ideas or their products or their company or whatever it is, their services, my favorite to work with has always been founders of organizations or people that are from a archetypically not sales background. So they might be a data analyst, they might be someone that's the head of product, because the reason I've always loved sales is it's ultimately about really great human interaction. And I started selling when I was 6 years old because I had an 8-year-old brother well, I still have a brother. He's no longer 8 years old, and I'm no longer 6. But he decided we should have a car washing business. And so at 6 years old, I was traipsing around behind my older brother and knocking on doors and trying to convince them to give these 2 young kids £5 to do what would turn out to be an average job of washing a car. And I'm sure that all the business we got was a sympathy vote as opposed to one of competency. So I've now been selling for inverted commas for 34 years. And I'm still fascinated by the fact this thing exists where 2 humans or many human beings come together and there's an exchange of conversation that results in one person buying into the other person and therefore normally exchanging money in order to buy something from them. And so, yeah, so I it's great to be here to talk about it, because in sum of all of that, I think if you are a founder or co-founder or a member of an organization that has created something in the tech space and you need to sell it, I absolutely fundamentally believe you can be brilliant at selling, and ultimately you need to be. Otherwise, no matter how good your product is, generally speaking, you won't be able to sell it if you can't have some sort of expertise or ability to convince people that they're worth giving their money for what you've created.
And why do you think, Ben, that founders have a natural advantage when it comes to selling? What is it that you've seen in all those thousands of people that you've done sales training with?
There's the one cliche, which I think stands the test of time, is that people buy from people. And I'll probably go through a few technical-ish frameworks here, which are great ways to look at selling, because I think it's really helpful. And it's impossible to run any training session, I think, without at least one 2x2 matrix. And so the first one I'll offer is that there's one where it's like likability from, let's say, 0 to 10, or you go -10, right, through to like a 10 out of 10 likable person. And then on the other axis is competence, going from, again, 0 to 10. And where people will buy from someone is, generally speaking, because they like them enough and they think they're competent enough. And of course, where you want to be is that it's called like a lovable star, like the top right-hand box, where it's like you're both likable and you're competent. And the reasons founders have an advantage is, by default, you've created something that is going to have that you hopefully have created that's of value to the world. And if you think about the people that you've been compelled by, it's normally because they've done something which is really inspiring or compelling. And human beings, we're complex in nature, but also there's still a simplicity to us, which is we love to kind of buy into something, particularly from the start. And so if you're a founder and you've created something which the world could benefit from, when you start presenting that to people, their eyes will light up. And actually, as a founder of a tech company, I think you have the most advantaged starting point, because if I'm coming along as like a rep from a big global company, most people are immediately going to have, and all the data will show this, a defense will look like, oh, here comes the salesperson. Like, they're going to try and flog me something. Whereas when you're a founder, it's like, I'm here as someone that has put my blood, sweat, and tears into this thing that I'm really passionate about. And so people normally give you more time as a starting point than the other. And then as you start to tell the story of what you've created, if you do that well enough, and you don't have to be like 10 out of 10 perfect at a sales kind of process, then you'll start to see immediately people are warming to you. And then from that point, you hopefully are on the path to then getting the outcome you're looking for, which is they buy the thing that you're selling.
It's really interesting. And I think, if you, I get a lot of messages and requests from people on LinkedIn, and if their job title is, something to do with business development, or they are obviously working business development, but they've changed the tagline to like empowering founders to generate leads for their business, I'm instantly, that wall definitely does come up, and I'm like, oh no, I'm sure you're a lovely person, but I don't want to let you over this wall, because I know within about 5 minutes I'm going to get something saying like, in today's challenging times, the startup journey is more difficult than ever. Here's how we can sell you something. And I do think that if you're a founder and you're genuinely passionate about what you're doing, then that is a more interesting conversation to have instantly. We talk about, and obviously, we're building a product and a service that's aimed at helping founders to do a lot of this stuff themselves. But the natural advantage that founders have when it comes to designing their first prototype and articulating what it is that they do as a business. And I think because a lot of founders that we've seen who've been really successful, they do come from a background where they've kind of had their career to some extent. They've learned about a space in really, really deep terms. They've achieved a lot, and now they've spotted an opportunity to make that space better. That actually is just really useful in so many ways. I think it's probably worth saying when we talk about founders, we're talking about those kinds of founders more than people who've just started a random business because they just kind of like the sound of it. So that's I think really cool. I wanted to just ask another question. You started off saying like sales is often seen as quite a dirty word, and can feel a little bit grubby. And actually, I think when we've been speaking to a lot of people who are just kind of dipping their toe in it for the first time, they've echoed that sentiment as well. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it has that perception?
Because sales is ubiquitous, as in almost everything we do every day involves some form of exchange of money for something in return. We're all being sold to all of the time. And if you look at it depends on your data point, between 80 to 92% of people don't trust salespeople because they think that they don't really have their best interests at heart, or they have their own interest is literally their own interest, which is, I just want you to buy this and then I'm done and I've got your money. So I think that's fundamentally the foundational reason as to why it's seen as a dirty word, is that we've all had bad sales experiences. And I don't think that's a universal qualifier. I genuinely believe that if you were to list to people, have you had a bad sales experience, we could probably all ream off streams of them. And so I think that's why it's seen as this terrible thing. But at the same time, if you then say to people, well, tell me about a good sales experience you have, almost all of us will relay the time they spoke to somebody that was really warm, they were really kind, they were really interested, they asked great questions, and it was actually like you wanted to then give them your money for the thing. Now you still need to want the thing, whatever that product is. But it's almost like the default human position is to sort of think about the negative experiences more frequently. It's something like if you have a bad sales experience or a bad experience with a company, you're likely to tell between 8 and 12 people like about that experience, because they're like, oh, I had this do, and it's like, might have been like, I won't name the company in case I get done for libel, but I can think of, we've probably all had a bad experience with a big global company. If we have a great sales experience, we're likely to tell at least 5 people. And so actually, although we're more likely to tell more people about the bad experience, if you have a great experience, you're still going to tell people. And so, yeah, I think the other final thing I'd finish on as to why it's such a sort of dirty word is that I think people's own mindset as a founder is, well, I'm a product person and I do product, I don't do sales. So people almost have this feeling like of inertia where they don't just want to have to go and do that thing. And almost as well, often, and it's not totally true, but products tend to be built by people that are more introverted and are more of a color profile, more blue, which is more analytical. And when you look at the archetypal salesperson, they tend to be more of the red and yellows. So when you look at literal personality types by psychometrics and behavioral science, the people that tend to design products don't tend to be the people that would normally be like the salesperson. And so it almost feels dirty to them as well, because it's like such an alien concept.
Yeah. And do you think that being introverted or extroverted has much of an impact on your ability as a salesperson?
Absolutely not. And that's not just, don't just take my word for it, Yaya. Like, look at the data, right? It's, generally speaking, it has nothing to do with introversion, extroversion, nothing to do with your color profile. The only asterisk to put on that is that as a starting point, you are at a slight advantage if you are more extroverted, because it tends to fit the types of behaviors you need. But once you've had like a day's worth of training, it becomes totally irrelevant. And actually what you start to realize is that introversion, for example, can put you at a much bigger advantage, because if an extrovert walks into the sales space, the reaction is going to be like, oh, here they come, the bombastic nutcase who's going to like try and blitz me of like energy. Whereas the understated introvert will be more seen as like, oh, right, that person's not saying much. And like when they do speak, they tend to be less verbose and get to the point. And I say that as someone that is like very yellow on the personality scale. Yeah.
And also very good at selling. But I think there's some really interesting things that you've just said that chime in a lot with a lot of the things that we've been speaking about with founders. I think there is that kind of grubbiness feels like it stems from a misconception that sales is about selling people things that they don't want, and almost like tricking them into doing it. That it's like a dark art that is somehow kind of manipulative. And actually, our experience of this, and I think you recommended the book To Sell Is Human, which I think was a really great shout in the early days. I'd really recommend anyone in a similar position reading that. Is that for me the sales process is more like problem solving, and we talk about empathy as a key design skill a lot of the time, but I would say that it's more about listening and asking questions and understanding what people's problems are, and then joining a dot between that and the dot on the other side, which is these are all the ways that I can help you. And actually, when you take that mindset, you're not just kind of jumping in and going, right, I've got all this stuff, do you want to buy it? Okay, here's like why you should. You're going, I recognize that you have a problem, I've understood that problem, I think these are the ways that I can help you, and I can deliver you a load of value. And it starts to become not quite altruistic, because you're obviously getting paid for that, but I think it feels a lot less grubby, because you're actually doing something that feels helpful, as opposed to sort of foisting something onto people that they may or may not quite want or need. And that for me is like, that's the only real way to do sales, isn't it? Like, you I suppose you can make people buy stuff they don't want and they don't need, but that feels like, I don't know, that feels like something else to what we would typically do, or what we typically advise B2B founders to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that taps into almost, I think all the things you shared there taps into almost all the fundamentals around what great sales looks like, because fundamentally, yes, you can just sell things to people, period. And there, of course, are people and companies that they don't really care about the end user, because ultimately they just want to sell something. Now, we're obviously not talking about that, because we're talking about people that are founders that really do care about their customers and we've tried to create something of great value. So assuming you're going into this with integrity and sincerity, that you want to do the right thing, one of the first steps of sales, and not to be too technical here, is to qualify whether you're connecting with the right people that would actually benefit from what you've created. And I think one of the most helpful things you can learn is how to run a great meeting. So when you engage with someone, whether that's online or whether it's in person, or you've bumped into someone in the elevator or a networking event, and after you do the nice exchange of pleasantries to know who they are and where they work, the first step in any great sales process is to be brilliantly curious, and to be curious on the three levels of curiosity, which is be epistemically curious, which is like deep knowledge. So learn a lot, all the facts and figures about that business and that person. To be diversively curious, which is to have this sort of the abstract thinking, the creative question outside the box, kind of trying to understand the dots they're trying to connect in the business. And then to be empathetically curious, which is to really understand the culture and the person themselves. And if you do that really well, and you show how curious you are, and that you genuinely do care about supporting them to achieve what they're trying to achieve, then not only will you show up as a very sincere and interesting person, you'll be a trustworthy person. And what you're therefore doing through all of that is that you're qualifying whether that conversation is worth continuing, because it could be that they're just not the right type of organizational person to buy from you. And that works both ways. Like, your product might not be quite right. If you think about what Yaya do, there is a certain subset of founders that you're trying to help. You're not trying to help all founders in all industries. You're trying to help fundamentally tech founders, right? And so therefore, that's a very, very clear group of people that you're trying to help. And then within that subset, there'll then be another layer of, if you take that whole marketplace of people in that space, then not all of them will also be right for Yaya and vice versa. But ultimately, you're trying to find the people that you really can support. And there's this magical moment through asking great questions, and then in response to those questions, you sharing ideas, i.e. what you do, that there'll be that epiphany moment where everyone goes like, yeah, this is it. We're the perfect match. And it is like matchmaking. That's what you're always trying to do.
Yeah, I was thinking about this because it really like is a stage of kind of dating almost, isn't it? You go through that kind of first audition, and I always feel like you kind of know instantly whether you could work with that person, and I think they're thinking all the time, can I work with these guys? And I think, we've, just because we've been doing it for quite a while now, we come off calls and we feel like, yeah, this is, that felt really good. The chemistry was there, the right values were aligned, and they get it. And I think, 9 times out of 10, those are the ones that kind of go through the whole time. But we've kind of got a good kind of gauge now on the ones that don't feel so great, and often that's us kind of being a bit resistant to that, which is quite interesting. But it's definitely, I feel like it is massively a two-way street, and I think even more now with stuff like Zoom and being able to kind of jump on calls quickly and be able to have quicker time together, because before you were just kind of arranging meetings and so I think now it's more important than ever that chemistry is right, because you do spend a lot of that kind of collaboration time with that person. So no, it's really really interesting.
Yeah, that's it. And I think you've touched on something that is very advantageous now, which is the ability to meet someone virtually. Because before, it takes a lot of effort to go and meet somebody in person, and it is. But the irony is that we've now got this great ability to jump on a virtual call and have that initial, if you call it a discovery meeting, is what I do typically call it. But actually, at the same time, you can see people that are, I think, where we've lost a bit of the art in human connection is, I used to think about the amount of times when I first worked in sales, like sales proper, when I started my career, like in the 2000s, was you'd pick up the phone to your boss multiple times a day. And now we always have like these moments in the day where it's like we have the big meeting, and every day is a one-to-one that happens at 11 o'clock on a Thursday. It's like we've also lost the art of just a quick conversation. And one of the best ways that you can grow what you do is just to have as many conversations with as many people as frequently as you can, particularly when you're building your product, where you're trying to validate ideas. And for those that are trying to get good at sales, is you just need to practice. So, for example, one of the great ways to build to run great meetings is to get really good at small talk. And if you get really good at small talk, you learn that the moment you meet somebody, you have immediately, rather than talking about the weather or the commute, you have a really engaging conversation. Now, how do you get good at small talk? Practice small talk as many times a day as you can. So when you're in a queue talking to someone the barista might be serving, like getting you a coffee, or it could be like you're on the train, just get good at sparking up conversations, and you get really good at small talk. If you get really good at small talk, then your meetings you have with people start in this far more engaging way. And so, yeah, the art of jumping on a call and essentially pitching what you do as, this is the intro, this is what we do. And if the person should immediately be like, that's interesting. And then you start talking about then you start asking the questions, and you kind of go from there.
Yeah, love a bit of small talk. I remember when I was having to do, and that's the only kind of way that I kind of realised that I could be actually all right at sales. And I've talked about this before, but when I moved to Australia, I was doing charity fundraising, and the small talk I used to use, if someone had like an AC/DC t-shirt on, or a band t-shirt, that was just gold. so easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you say, like, don't try not to talk about the weather, although naturally as Brits that's kind of revert to every single time. I do think you can like you can do a lot and accomplish a lot with like virtual meetings, but I do think in person is also brilliant because there's stuff that just gets really left behind, especially with like certain people that are kind of harder to break down on those kind of calls. So yeah, it's a mix.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, and you're a really good example, Adam, right? Because I remember when we first met, and I was running essentially a sales training program at the company we all worked at, and you came into that as totally self-deprecatingly, like you're this amazing creative, and yet not only did you have you had the most astonishing ability just to build rapport with people because you're just great at that, but actually you're someone where you don't need to show up as a technically gifted salesperson. You just need to know enough and have enough structure and enough understanding about how it works. And so, yeah, you're actually a great example of someone that would never normally see themselves as a salesperson, but you're having to sell all the time.
Oh, thanks, Ben. That means a lot. I think I was that person as well who kind of poo-pooed it. Like, I did think it was like, when you think of sales, my brain goes to like annoying people in like car phone warehouse. That's I think what a lot of people like assume, and it's really not that at all. But yeah, it's thanks. Cool.
Very good. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some imposter syndrome, giving away value, and how you join up product, marketing, and sales. So see you in a second. Welcome back. We are still chatting to Ben about sales. And one of the things that's come up a lot in conversations is people feeling like they have imposter syndrome when they are starting to have their first sales conversations, partly because they haven't done sales before and partly because it's an early stage business. So you are pitching something that's new and largely untested. Is that something you've seen a lot of, Ben? And how do people overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably it's the starting point for most people. They think I shouldn't be doing this. I don't want to be doing this. The first thing I would say in response to that is don't try and push it away. It's like anything. If there's anxiety there in your life about something, just be aware of it first and foremost. And it's really natural. Even the most seasoned salespeople before a pitch can get nervous and have imposter syndrome. So I think it's very, very natural. But I also think you can quite comfortably conquer it. And I think conquering it comes down to a few fundamental things. The first is of course I'm going to say this, but I do think it's worth investing in some form of training. And that training can be as simple as a half a day or through to a few days where you can just learn the fundamentals of how you run effective meetings, facilitate great workshops, because it's like anything. If we have training, then we are being given knowledge and ideas as to how to be more effective at something. And by doing that, you immediately feel more confident because you're like, okay, I've got an understanding of what great looks like. The second thing is, of course, is to practice and to try and practice in safe environments. And when I say safe environments, I mean in low risk. So if, for example, you happen to be lucky enough to get a really high potential meeting whereby the person that you're meeting with could be buying a lot of what you do, you want to go into that meeting ready and prepared. And so practice pitching what you do, asking great questions, running a great discovery, small talk, opening a meeting, set an agenda with your colleagues or with friends or anybody you can, and in the most effective way you can, which is to almost brief that person on the type of person you're meeting. And I think the third way that I would advise anybody to overcome imposter syndrome is to firstly believe in yourself, which might be an obvious thing to say, but when I say believe in yourself, like believe in what you've created. And if you believe in yourself and know that it's got value to the world, then you should be really proud to go out and talk about it and try to enjoy it. And that will lean into something else I'm sure we'll talk about, which is if you can just be good at one thing, it's like telling your value proposition, like telling the story of your company. And if you get good at that, and you get good at that by it being a good value proposition, then you're also immediately going to have high confidence, or higher confidence at least, because you know what you're talking about and someone's going to be interested to hear that.
There's a lot to unpack there. So let's get into it a little bit. I think first thing I'd say is my own personal experience, which I've spoken about a lot, of coming in, and I worked in marketing, which is probably in itself a little bit of an advantage to people who maybe haven't worked in that kind of space at all. I've said before, I don't think that I felt like I had imposter syndrome. I felt like I was just a real beginner at sales. I'd never done it before, and I knew it was something that was going to be really important to get good at. But I started off and I wasn't great at it because, why would I be? I hadn't done it before. I hadn't had any real training in it, and I had to kind of learn. And that practice point you made, I think, is really, really important. So I don't think imposter syndrome is where you're like, am I this person? I've got doubts about it. I was very sure I just wasn't a salesperson because it was all new. The second thing I think within that is I think the value proposition is just the most fundamental building block of everything in any business, but particularly in startups. And I think it's it's really fundamental to brand and marketing, because that is an expression of your value proposition. It's really important to product because it is, that is basically setting the direction of what you're building, what problem you're trying to solve, what value you can add to people. And it's really important to sales, in my view, because it's the sort of nucleus of everything. If you know that and you've really internalized it, and it's really clear to you what that is, you can actually then express it in lots of different ways. And when we spoke about joining up the problem that people have with your solution really, the thing that people really care about is the value that it adds people, not necessarily the sort of features and functionality of the technology. So if you're really clear on what that value is, then you can join that dot much more easily and say, right, yeah, we can help solve a defined problem for you and add this value. Here's how. And I think because all of those things are connected, it's easier in the early days of a startup to think about them holistically, and it gets harder as time goes on, and you start to build up silos where marketing might have a view of what your customers need and what your product is that is different to what your product team have. It shouldn't be the case, but sometimes it is. And then the value, you find that kind of marketing have they maybe not call it a value proposition, might call it a brand ethos or something. Product might have a North Star, which is effectively a value proposition. The sales people, I think, are particularly interesting in this mix because they're the ones that are having the most conversations with actual customers. They're the ones who are constantly getting bombarded with signals of interest, and those could be really micro things like body language in a conversation, how people, how their eyes light up when you talk about something, or it could be the problems that people are articulating that you're then going out and trying to kind of build solutions around. And so they have this amazing sort of database of customer inputs that's building up all the time. And I think, when you're in the early stages of business, the founder is probably in the midst of creating the brand, heavily involved in creating the product and having those sales conversations. So again, there's a natural advantage where founders are able to create these really amazing and compelling value propositions and iterate them over time because they are the kind of nexus point of all of those things. And I think, actually there's a lot that bigger businesses could learn and benefit from taking the same kind of approach that a founder would take in a startup.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
There's some. I can hear some zzz in the background.
Yeah, it's like a soaring or something, isn't it? Yeah, that's cool.
So because it just cut out to me answering or responding to that, yeah?
Yeah, we can cut this bit out.
Not if I jump in first.
Yeah. Do you want to jump in on that point, Adam, or shall I go next?
No, No, I was just going to build on the power of the value proposition, because we've talked about it so much, and how people just don't get it right at certain business. But yeah, I think you go, then I can jump on whatever you do.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And one thing that I should have mentioned earlier as well is that the way that you also become really successful at selling your ideas and your product is like authenticity, and that's what people really buy into. They buy into the person that's behind the whole idea. And so if you show up as a really authentic person that's really passionate about what they do, you're again at a great advantage. But ultimately, it doesn't matter how authentic you are, how technically brilliant you are at sales, your value proposition is the genesis, it's the epicenter, it's the whole pie. And value proposition is one of those terms that most people have heard of, but I don't think we consciously think about the words, which is like the value like of your proposition. And to give an example, one of the areas I think that people go wrong is they almost become too self-indulgent about the story and of the message they want to put out to the world. Here's a good example. Everything I train when it comes to sales comes back to one, I think, beautiful thing, which is building trust. So I began sales training from a point of most sales training I didn't think was particularly good, but most of it was too gnarly, because it was all about just kind of this mean, let's just sell stuff. And I thought, but I really want to build training where people are really themselves, and their greatest asset is the fact that they're different. Like, your greatest value is your difference, and therefore sales should be about building empathy and trust and genuine rapport that's long lasting. And so my value proposition was all about that, right? Which is all about this heartfelt sort of soothsayer, like wonderful essence of like, be a good person, and then you'll be really successful at what you do. My audience was predominantly sales directors. And what do sales directors care about? Help me sell more. Now, a lot of sales directors also care about all the other things. So the value proposition should be, we help you sell more. Now, the next message is, and we do that by making you brilliant at how you show up, be authentic, be yourself, and build trust that lasts forever, and you become irreplaceable to your customers. And the way we do that, and away you go. But ultimately, what's the value that people are looking for from sales training? It's like, ultimately want to be good at sales. And so when it comes to your value proposition, the ability to get it down to a sentence, to a paragraph, and a page, but ultimately focus on the most important person, which is the person that's going to buy what you do. And as we know, in most things that you sell, there's 2 or 3 buyers. So you might have the primary one. If you think about sales training, you have the sales director, you tend to have the head of learning, and then you have the most important people ultimately at the end, which is the people that you're going to train and the people they're going to sell to. But ultimately, you've got to think, where's the starting point? And the starting point will be the decision maker, and the one that ultimately says, okay, we can sign that contract for that value. And so getting great your value proposition is not only fundamental to the ability to present your value to the world. Coming back to imposter syndrome and why it connects is, if your value proposition is on point, which will take many iterations a lot of the time, and I don't know many companies that have ever truly been happy with their value proposition. It constantly moves like a moving target. But if you get your value proposition really on point, that will also reduce the imposter syndrome, because you know you've got a really great story that you can tell to people that are going to want to listen to it, because they really understand the value of your proposition.
That's cool.
I'm going to take a second just to explain what a value proposition actually is, because I know that we've talked about it a little bit, but I think for the benefit of listeners who are perhaps just coming into this episode, it's probably worth saying what we mean by it. And it's basically, I think, it should, as you said, you can articulate it as a story, a paragraph, a sentence, but I would start with the sentence, which is usually the harder thing to try and create. We would always use the format, we help a specific person and type of organization to release some value or realize some value by doing a thing. And the thing is what we do as a business. Where I think a lot of businesses get to is, we do this thing. And an unclear map of who they do it for, or just a sort of attempt to do, be everything to all people and not be really focused, and actually forget the value part of this, which is, the reason that people are buying your technology isn't because of the buttons that they can click. It's because of the impact on the business of this technology, and that's the thing that you really actually have to sell. It's the thing that you really have to focus on when you're building a product, and it's the thing that you really have to communicate when you're building a brand. Otherwise, what you're doing is basically just sending like a product spec, which it's like great. Okay, it does all these things. I don't really care. And I think I also wanted to just talk about the sort of authenticity point as well, because we had an interesting thing the other day, which I think kind of highlights why that is so important. So we have a value proposition. The value of the work that we do as a business is essentially, we help people to secure early adopter customers into their startup. Now we do that by designing brands and product prototypes and finding product market fit and building websites and all of those kinds of things. But the reason that people invest in those things is because they're trying to get customers into their business, and they're trying to grow their business. I really like it when we have business development meetings and you can have a really direct conversation. And one of the questions that we've been asked a bit recently, and specifically in this meeting the other day, was, you keep telling me that we need to be different to every other business to be successful. We need to be really differentiated. Why is your business different from everyone else, and why should we go with you? Which is not just a great question, but the directness with which it was asked got me really excited, because I was like, okay, we're just not messing about here. But obviously, that you have to think on your feet how you're going to respond to that. And that, I think, is where the authenticity point comes in. It's like, because I genuinely believe in our value proposition and it's how I approach everything, I was like, okay, I don't really need to think about this. I just need to kind of express authentically like who I am and how I think about that. And my answer to that question was something along the lines of, the reason that we're different to everyone else is that we're a real pain in the ass about this stuff. Like, you will work with us. We won't just give you the brand that you want to have. We'll give you the brand that you actually need, one that is genuinely differentiated clearly from your competitors. And if you don't want that and you push us in a direction that is very middle of the road, we will kick up a fuss about it and we will push back on it. And to be honest, that's a reason why you shouldn't work with us as well. Like, if you don't want to have a difficult time when you try and go down what we see as the wrong path, the path that kind of conflicts with our values and our beliefs about how we do this and how we deliver our value proposition, then it's going to be problematic. And that actually landed really well. And I think they were saying, well, we're looking for a partner on this who actually, one, has beliefs, which a surprisingly small amount of businesses have. Two, stands by those beliefs, and three, is like almost can't exist in any other way because of that authenticity point. And I think the final thing is actually fixated on the value rather than just the deliverable, because it would be easy for us to just go, yeah, we'll give you a brand, we'll give you a website, we'll give you a product prototype. What I was trying to say was, what we'll actually give you is the chance for your business to be successful the way that we think it needs to be done to unlock that value. And I think that is like muscle memory. That's really what the authenticity is. It's that kind of instant reflex to go, yeah, of course I've got an answer to that question.
One of the it's a great story, and one of the sad things that I think sometimes about the way that we use technology now and social media platforms is certain words, I think they get a bit ruined, or a lot ruined. And the word authenticity is probably one of them, because 10 years ago, the word authenticity wasn't really in the common lexicon that frequently, or sort of the ether. And now you see it everywhere. It's about authenticity and telling the truth. And I think it's therefore, it's on the face, it might have lost its value, but it actually is so important. And I was reading this great book just last week called The Art of Creative Thinking, which I would recommend to anybody. And in one of the chapters, they're all very pithy chapters, it talks about Coco Chanel and how Coco Chanel, particularly in the early days, was ridiculed and laughed at and mocked because she was so different. And there's a quote from her, where I think I, in some ways, paraphrased it earlier, which is, in order to be irreplaceable, you have to be different. And there are companies that need to exist that basically have a box and you buy the box and the box is great. And then there are companies, and normally tech founders, that are creating something which has got a real authentic, the whole thing is authentic. And people, your great advantage in when you come to sale is just to be yourself. And that's why I say you want some technical ability to be able to understand how you run meetings and facilitate workshops, but your greatest asset will always be you. And I can say wholeheartedly that if I were to take the 100 best salespeople I've ever seen, about 10% of them will just be technical experts that could just execute a sale as though it's like some sort of blueprint, almost like robotic. And that is a thing. But the other 90, the reason they're so successful is because they're just brilliant at being themselves. And they don't really compromise, or not, they don't compromise their personality in any way, shape, or form. And that can include, for example, like an interesting one is like, what should you wear to a sales meeting? Now, there is times, for example, if you're going to go and you are going into, let's say, the boardroom of a bank, out of respect, you probably want to wear a suit. But actually, I could never wear a suit of like a hipster might wear, right? Because I'm not a hipster, right? And so it'd be inauthentic for me to wear that type of suit. But if you're a hipster and you show up in a suit from Next, and nothing wrong with a suit from Next, you yourself won't feel right, and they'll see through it. And so it's like, you should wear a suit, but you should wear a suit which probably is a bit baggier and higher around the ankles, because that's authentic to who you are. So you've really got to understand like your own style, and if you can never compromise on that, and then combine it with just that little bit of sort of technical flair, then you'll be not only will you be fine, like you'll flourish.
Oh, that's a good point, isn't it? Because I kind of used to think about that quite a lot. Like, how should we kind of be showing up in terms of like how we should be, what we should be wearing. And I think sometimes we've done stuff that I think we've both felt uncomfortable with in terms of like how we've kind of dressed up for a meeting or something, and it just didn't really feel. It didn't feel authentic. Didn't feel like ourselves. So I think it's a really important point. Obviously, you don't want to be there with kind of flip-flops on, but I mean, definitely, I think it's much more acceptable now. And as a founder, I think, you have to show your personality, and that comes across not just in like, an Oxford shirt and chinos. So it might be your vibe, but I think it's important for you to feel comfortable, because if you feel comfortable, then, that's going to come across in the way that you communicate. It was interesting, Ben. I was like thinking, in terms of, authenticity, and I really feel off what your answer there was like, it was great, because that's kind of almost a different perspective on what authenticity is, and that's kind of authenticity in like what you believe in fundamentally, and your values and all that kind of stuff. And it's great, and then it's kind of like being authentic, and just in terms of like how you speak, and not being too prescriptive and all that kind of stuff. What's the kind of balance then between creating that kind of environment where that person is you're likable to that person, but then also like your onions and what you're talking about? Like what is the kind of, if you were giving advice for someone going into their first sales call, and we've talked a lot about people talking more about the features, and we talked about the archetypes of the generally founders who are much more like focused on the more technical things, and get kind of lost in that. What is the right kind of balance for someone?
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant question. And this comes back to why practice is so important, because we can talk about anything as an art and a science, and it's really true of sales. Like the science of it is, there is a way to run a great meeting. Now, it's not a total blueprint, but rather there are segments in a meeting. A segment in a meeting is preparation, make sure you're prepared, right? Another segment is like how to open a meeting. Another segment is how to ask great questions. And those things will move around and they'll blend and conflate. The art comes from that bit, right? So in terms of what the balance is, you've got to get a feel for it. And this is when you get to a more further down the rabbit hole of sales, which is like the psychology of sales, which really is a fancy-ish way of saying like understanding people, right? So, for example, if you go into a meeting with someone that loves to talk and have high-level conversations and think about the art of the possible and is very visionary, you need to respond to that accordingly. I had a meeting just this morning where in the first 15 seconds of the meeting, my meeting plan went out the window because this person opened up with said, I know we've got an hour, I've only got 30 minutes and I want us to get straight to commercials, right? So in that moment, the very worst thing I can do is to go, well, I want to talk about the vision, right? They're just going to immediately get annoyed by me. And so part of it is just experience, and where you're at a disadvantage if you've never really sold in that type of environment before is you don't have that experience and you've got to probably go through some painful moments. And a big part of that as well is that just accept some meetings won't go well. And it is the case that they're the best ones to learn from. But thinking we're starting at ground zero and thinking that I want to give a tech founder a good answer, I would say the best way to approach this is to firstly learn how to run great meetings. Secondly, prepare really well. So think about those types of scenarios and what could happen and what your response would be in each of them. Really make sure that you connect with that person. Ensure you connect with the person on LinkedIn first and try to get a bit of a read of their personality style. And that's quite straightforward because if they've written loads and they write articles and they post lots of comments, you know, okay, this is probably what's called a yellow personality or green personality. So they're sort of they like to talk, they like to have animated conversations. If they've got cold facts and not little written, they're more likely to be a more just get to the point type person. And then the final thing is just to really know your stuff. And when I say know your stuff, know the types of questions you should ask, know how to tell your story really well, know how to overcome objections. And so typically speaking, whatever you're selling, there's going to be a certain set of objections that people will have. And there might be objections on price. It might be objections on the feasibility to implement it, to integrate with other systems in the company if you're selling a tech product. So think about all the problems that could come up in a call and try and prepare an answer for them. And I think to summarize all of that, it'll probably be quite transparent that as we're going through this conversation, I keep coming back to the same things because really selling is quite easy. And it's have a structure, know what you do really, really well, really know your customers and really know the value that you can bring. And those first meetings, it's a mutual two-way thing to understand if there is that relationship there that's worth pursuing further. And if you get those things right, then you're way further ahead than most people are beginning.
That's great advice. I think one thing I would add is that, and Ben, you talk a lot about being likable. I think being likable is really important, but I'd say being universally liked isn't. Like I think that is actually not a great goal to go for, and that's both at a level of like do you have positive interactions with somebody and do you like their personality, but also like is what you're selling going to be universally liked as well? Like in some cases, it's not the right thing for somebody, and one of the worst things I think you can do in a sales meeting is you have those conversations where somebody's like quite resistant to what you can offer, and every time they sort of make a point that counters an argument that you've already put forward, you're like, oh no, well what I actually meant was that it is the thing that you want, and they're like, well, I don't think it is. No, let me like desperately kind of explain to you why, and you just kind of like on the back foot and backtracking. Like sometimes it's not the right thing and it's not the right fit, and I think with the personality thing and the authenticity and all those kind of things, like if you're genuinely authentic, some people are not actually going to respond well to you, and that's okay. I remember something that you said to me a few years ago. I think I think you said, yeah, I know I'm quite an unusual person, but I bet you've told your friends about me. And actually, that's quite a cool way to think about it, isn't it? Is that you want to be memorable to the people that are going to have an interest in you and are going to want to kind of build a relationship with you. You don't necessarily just want to be a vanilla middle of the road person.
And also like
you go ahead.
Now, because now you're like you've got to punch a bit harder when you're a small business, and you're often up against like bigger organizations. Like you need to stand out, and I think you need to be memorable. And I think it's definitely how we've won work against bigger agencies, because we've kind of flipped the conversation on its head a little bit, and that's it's been a really good way of for us to sell. So I think, yeah, you're right. I like that. It's kind of it is a bit Marmite sometimes, and but I think it's not a bad thing at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, firstly, it's funny hearing that, because I'd forgotten I said that. It's the type of thing I would have said about 10 years ago and probably wouldn't say now. But it's but the thing is, it's probably still true, which is in the sense of, I remember I've got like a friend that just everybody loves, and we walks into a room, and I remember thinking, oh man, like it'd be so nice to like be that. But actually, you got to understand like who you are, and actually, I think those 2 points you articulated there, like punch a bit harder, is like it really stands out. And yeah, I mean, fundamentally, one of the great stories I relay is someone had got into a meeting and they were really themselves. So someone went through a training program, and because they were really themselves in that meeting, the person had said, like, I don't, well, exactly the scenario you described, Phill. It clearly wasn't a right fit. And so that the founder said, I don't actually think we're the right fit for you. And they sort of ended on good terms. And a week later, they got a call from someone, said, oh, you spoke to my friend the other week. And they were laughing. They said, you're not the right fit, but he thinks you're the right fit for us. And they landed their biggest contract from that person, because he had the honesty to say, I don't think we're right for you. And that stood out to that person. And because of that, that person then happily, and I think they've now won 3 bits of business through that person. So it's a bit of a gamble, right? And that is a really good case, but just be yourself and know what you can and can't do. And that's ultimately going to be in the long run, the best strategy.
Yeah. It's not telling people to be like, go out there and be, dicks or anything. It's just kind of standing up for what you believe in. If you don't like Coldplay, don't say you like Coldplay just to make everyone happy. Like have conviction in those things.
Can I finish on a?
I don't mind Coldplay anymore.
Can I finish on a Kendrick and Drake kind of anecdote?
No, you're going to.
I'm amazed it's taken this long to get.
Well, which is someone was relaying a story, because people that don't know that Kendrick and Drake had this big beef. And Kendrick Lamar, by every sort of objective measure, kind of won that. But what was interesting about it was someone relayed a story of how they'd met Drake and they were wearing like an Arsenal shirt, and they said that Drake was saying to them like, "Oh, Arsenal, my favourite team," and it was waxing lyrical about Arsenal. And he said that 3 months later he saw Drake talking to someone, and Drake was doing the same thing about Man City, or was wearing a Man City shirt. And he said, and it just, and I'm probably getting the teams wrong, and I'm butchering the story a little, but that's insincerity. And one scale I talk about in sales is the sincere to insincere scale. And in the middle of that is like being a sycophant, right? Insincere is where you're just being dishonest. A sycophant is when you just say, yeah, I like everything, because you want to get on that person's side, where the people that are great at sales are just always sincere to the end, from the start and to the end. And if you do that, then again, it's about playing the long game, because your reputation ultimately is really everything, and your reputation will always precede you. And your reputation, if it's one of integrity, then you can never really go wrong. And again, come looping all the way back round. That's why I love working with founders of tech companies, because that's normally their starting point, because that's all they know. Like, they care so much about this thing, and people will see that. So yeah, stay to sincere.
I really thought that story was going to end with, and of course, Kendrick Lamar is a huge Newcastle fan who goes to all the away games. Yeah. I think that's brilliant. So just to sort of bring things all together then, and just kind of one final thought. I think when you're in the space of starting a B2B tech startup, and a lot of what we've spoken about today is really relevant to those kind of sort of low volume but high value sales conversations where you are obviously you're in a conversation with a human being as opposed to just kind of buying stuff directly off a website. I think the principles that you've outlined of just being true to yourself and true to the value that you're actually delivering to people, they're really fundamental, because you're not going to have a long track record and a load of case studies and things like that. So when you're talking to your first customers, they need to buy into you as individuals. They need to really believe in you, trust that you can deliver the value that you claim to be able to deliver through the technology that you're providing. They need to like you, and they need to have an element of being a bit of a risk taker, because you are going to be probably a smaller alternative to something else that's out there. You also need to be really differentiated, because you need to be able to offer something different to those larger incumbent people, and that again comes back to being a bit Marmite, being sincere, being authentic, and all those kinds of things. And ultimately, one of the things that I think we've learned, and that I think we've talked about a little bit today, is that with the idea of having a clear value proposition, which will change over time, and it's an iterative thing, and it's really, like, as I say, kind of part of the product development process as much as it is part of the sales process. So it will evolve over time. Is actually that gives you a really clear position on what you actually do and how you provide value to businesses. What that then enables you to do is to say, okay, the highest amount of value that we deliver as a business is delivered by becoming a customer and using our tech platform and unlocking a load of value through interacting with that package. But there's a whole then series of other things that you can do and you can provide to people that are different ways of delivering that value. And I think this comes back to the point about imposter syndrome and sales feeling a bit grubby potentially, is if you see your role in this as giving away as much value as possible, as often as possible, to as many people as possible, it's back to that almost kind of altruistic thing. It makes you personally feel good. I mean, for us, it gives us a lot of energy to just have conversations with founders and say, what are you struggling with? Okay, we've got experience of this. We maybe should think about this kind of thing. We're not charging money for that. It's just good. What that then does is that people then start to build trust in you, and that helps you to sell to them ultimately. But what it also does, which we've noticed, which is really interesting, is it then makes them want to go and recommend you to other people, and that's how you then start to kind of amplify out your your ability to build a network and do all this kind of thing. So I'm a big believer in karma, but I have noticed that funny little things that at the time you almost think, why am I going for a coffee with this person, or why are we having a conversation about this thing, and what I'm like, giving this away, and I don't see that there's a potential sale right now. They have this sort of butterfly effect where you don't actually know where those things are gonna end up. But some of the most interesting sales conversations we've had have come off the back of just giving stuff away, and I think, again, not random stuff, but stuff that's linked to your value proposition. That for me is really, really, really important, and one of the most valuable things that you can do in terms of getting comfortable with sales and also getting more sales.
Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah, absolutely. Lovely way to to summarize a lot of the things we've spoken about, for sure.
Cool. Okay, well, we are probably at the end of this chat. I hope not the last time we get to chat to you on this podcast, because I think there's a million other things that we could chat about, I think, together. But before we go, I would highly recommend to people seeking Benjamin out and following him on LinkedIn. And is there anywhere else, anything else that you want to point people towards today?
Unless you want to hear a joyful person play moody rock and minor keys, then on which I share on YouTube, then no, just LinkedIn's the place.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll maybe put the link to the YouTube channel.
Put the link there. Well. Get you some views.
Yeah, cool. And as ever from us, we would ask, please, if you've enjoyed this conversation today, please like, subscribe, if you can, leave a review, and recommend us to other people that you think might be interesting in your WhatsApp groups and wherever you talk to people. The prototyping toolkit is still available, and you can find out more about what we're doing at cultproducts.yaya.co. Really enjoyed the conversation today, guys, and thanks a lot for coming on the podcast, Ben. It's been great having you. I think that's all from me.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's been great. Yeah, awesome.
Cool. Alrighty, cool.
Great.
Take care.
See you guys later.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.